one of the most dangerous trends is you have these four countries getting closer and closer. This is Iran, North Korea, Russia, and China. World War II started as two regional wars, and we now have two regional wars. And the adversaries are aligned, and the allies are pretty much aligned. And so it's something to watch very, very closely. This could be a global conflict, and you owe it to the American people to be prepared for a global conflict, not just China, Taiwan, or Russia invading.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Future of GovCon. This is a weekly podcast to bring together experts from across the industry and look at what's happening today and how it's going to impact the future of our industry. I'm Jake Frazer. I'm the owner and CEO of Precision Talent Solutions. In leading one of the industry's top executive search firms, I get to talk to influencers every day. C-suite executives, board members, growth leaders, top government officials, military flag officers. And on this podcast, what we're doing is we're bringing in these experts from AI, from space, from medical, from logistics, from engineering. And we're sitting down and talking about what's happening in their specific area of the industry and how it will impact the future. So pour a cup of coffee and let's get started. Hey everybody, it's Jake. Welcome back to another episode of the Future of GovCon. Today we are super lucky to have one of the brightest minds coming out of the government and out of the think tank world. Barry Pavel is joining us today from the greater DC area. Barry, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks a lot, Jake. I'm really looking forward to it.
So Barry's, he has an incredible career, and I want everybody to listen to just a little bit about his background because it'll help you understand frame the discussion we're going to have today. So he's had a great career, a lot in think tanks, but also in government. So he has really good perspective. He spent about 4 years at RAND Corporation as the VP and the director for their National Security Research Division. He spent about 11 years at the Atlantic Council, and they only let the smart guys in there at the Atlantic Council. We know that. And he helped found the Scowcroft Center there. Is that right, Barry?
That's right, yeah.
So helped set up one of the most defining areas within government from a think tank perspective. He spent a couple of years on the National Security Council, where he worked for both Bush and Obama. So he sees both sides, which is great. And spent 15 years in the Department of Defense at various levels, always focused on strategy and just helping guide the country from within. Has a great education. The guy's obviously smart, and he does his homework. He has a bachelor's degree from Brown University in applied math and econ, which is really incredible, and also a couple of master's degrees from Princeton. So it's great to have you here with us today, Barry.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation covering a wide range of important topics, and I always learn from speaking with you, Jake, so that's even better.
And Barry just joined our roster of precision experts, and he has a lot of areas of expertise. Some they're going to scare you, right? So, or they scare me at least. But he's going to talk a lot about U.S. foreign policy and a lot of it through the lens of AI. And I think there are a lot of people talking about AI out there, but I really do consider Barry to be one of the experts, the true experts in that area. And so for our customers out there in our community, everybody being impacted by AI, we're really going to try and tease out from Barry how AI is going to impact our national security, but also the government contracting industry, because we're all obviously getting touched by this, but it's really going to have an impact on our industry. Is that accurate to say, Barry?
It's accurate. I'm not a technical expert though, so I'm always modest about my expertise, but we can certainly get into it, and I'm sure I'll learn from the conversation as well.
So before we jump in, let's go back. Just talk about growing up, your path into government. You're from the Philly area, is that right?
I'm from what I like to call the original capital, Philadelphia. And I got interested in national security when I was at college in Brown. Came down and served as a research assistant at a federally funded research and development center, the Institute for Defense Analyses. Then went to Princeton and got a couple of master's degrees, and then came directly into the Pentagon in a new office that was called Strategy. Pretty neat, in the Office of the Secretary of Defense at the time, and learned just a ton from my colleagues. And this office's charter was to map out the strategic direction, the trajectory of the Defense Department at the time. And ever since then, I've had a passion for strategy, and ended up actually helping to write various presidents' national security strategies, many national defense strategies, and then other strategies on deterrence issues. I wrote the first cyber deterrence strategy in the Pentagon. I wrote a terrorism deterrence strategy that not everybody agreed with, but CENTCOM executed, and there's a chapter about it in a book called Counterstrike. And so then rose up in the Pentagon and moved over to the Special Operations Low Intensity Conflict area for a couple years under Mike Vickers, really, really interesting character. And then the Secretary of Defense sent me to the White House in late 2008. He was very worried about a terrorist attack during the presidential transition, and wanted someone who knew how to kind of pick up the phone and call the right people. So I did that. Obama team came in after the election, talked to me. They fired everybody except for me and two other people. And so I stayed through all the strategic reviews. So I ended up working for President Bush and then President Obama, and then moved to the Atlantic Council and had this wonderful opportunity to start the Scowcroft Center on strategy and security. And then went to Rand after about a decade there. So
wow. So going back to the beginning, I want to pick a couple things out there. Why did you decide to go into government? You were studying applied mathematics and economics.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, I just got really interested in national security from a couple courses in college that were not part of my major, my applied mathematics economics major. And they just kind of animated me and got me kind of excited and stirred up some passions. And so decided to, it's funny, at the time I was like, government's my last choice. I'll go into academia or research, but I don't want to go into government. And then one of my graduate school professors ended up as an assistant secretary of defense and kind of pulled me in. And then it was just every day was an adventure, every day something different. Was not hard to get up in the morning. It's just really noble and important work, and went by in a flash. I mean, just a decade and a half, and boom.
Did you have any military or government influence in your life, or your family, your parents, your brothers, anything?
My father was in the Air Force. But other than, I mean, he was not he didn't kind of talk about it a lot. So no, it was just more sort of an attraction to the importance of the mission, and learned a lot. I think it's very important for civilians in the national security establishment to play significant roles. I mean, that is sort of a constitutional issue, framing that we have, where there's civilian control of the military, and I think it's a very it's an important and hopefully healthy a set of relationships. It's not always healthy, but that's something that's, I think, essential to our republic.
So who was the Secretary of Defense when you came in that first job? Who was the ultimate boss there?
Well, this was back in the Jurassic era, so it was, I believe, Les Aspin in the 1990s under the Clinton administration. And then there were a series of other secretaries, as I recall, including Secretary Bill Perry, who was very thoughtful. And then I think the second term of Clinton was Secretary William Cohen, who was also quite thoughtful. And then into the Bush administration, where Secretary Rumsfeld came in, and boy, things changed really in interesting ways. I'm nonpartisan, centrist, but the entrepreneurial culture that Secretary Rumsfeld created was just unbelievably healthy, and led to enormous new creativity and rearrangements to help align, the Pentagon with where the world was headed. A very chilling, and so this is worth a minute or two because it's a lesson for me at least. In 2001, Rumsfeld and his team came in, and their main theme was, you guys are way too confident on two scenarios, and you're missing the fact that we could easily be surprised sometime. You're very focused on an Iraq war and a North Korea war, but you're missing other state-centric threats like possibly China, possibly Iran, and you're missing. We could be very surprised. So we need lighter, more flexible military capabilities to be able to go where we need them, when we need them, et cetera. And I'm sitting in a E-ring office with a window one day in June of 2001. And my boss is looking out the window at a plane coming into Reagan over the Potomac. And he says, quote, "One of these days, one of those planes is going to come right into this building." And that was 2 or so months before
Wow.
9/11. Of course, I was in the building on 9/11. It was not a pleasant day, but we went back in the next day, even though part of the building was on fire still. I cleaned the jet fuel soot off my desk, off my papers, and we had to redo a draft strategy that was due to Congress by the end of September. So we had a couple weeks to redo based on this kind of strategic shock. And so another lesson for me was, prepare to be surprised. I like to say in Washington, we're very good at being surprised. We excel at being surprised. And so we should have modesty about our confidence of where we're going to be threatened, when we're going to be threatened, and how we're going to be threatened. So, for example, I think a China-Taiwan conflict, which is the overarching scenario of concern right now, I do think it's critically important we be prepared. I do think it's critically important we seek to deter Chinese aggression. I worry, are we over-focused on this thing? And what else are we missing, either from China or from other types of threats? So sorry to go on so long, but there were some lessons from that time.
Yeah, I mean, I think there have been a couple of events, at least in my lifetime, that have shifted government and shifted just how we think. And certainly 9/11 is one of them. And it feels like of late we're going through, I mean, it's this combination of this AI revolution that's happening now, an administration probably with similar Rumsfeldian tendencies, right? And just a shifting of America's position on the world stage, and all these things are culminating right now into, I think, drastic changes, particularly in the government contracting industry.
Yeah, very much so. I think there's a handful of sort of key, mega changes, let's call them, that I watch and I think are shaping our environment and will do so for years to come. One is the geopolitical, and I recommend a book from about 10 years ago called "The Jungle Grows Back" by Kaplan. And his main thesis was very simple, that it was very unusual for one power to dominate the globe and to do so in a sort of beneficent, generous way, the way the U.S. did after World War II for, 60, 70 years, and to exert enormous military power and spend enormous amounts of resources for the good of global stability, which we also benefited from, but so did so many others, including China, by the way. And so he said, it's not a surprise that the American people are tiring of carrying that burden in such a disproportionate way. And so it's an ahistorical period because there were no major wars for such a long time, because people knew if they did anything, the U.S. was going to kind of smack them back down. In my opinion, that period ended in 2012 when President Obama did not strike the Syrian targets despite his declaratory policy. And that led to a lot of allies calling me the next day or emailing me the next day saying, what does that mean for us? You have an alliance with us. What does that mean? Are you going to not come to our defense now? I mean, it was almost instant. Mm-hmm. And so, we've warned allies for a long time that the American people aren't going to go forever in terms of sustaining a disproportionate share of the burden. Secretary of Defense Gates gave us a famous speech in Brussels, I believe it was in 2011, where he warned NATO allies directly that this is going to end unless you up your game. And so now that's coming home to roost. I think there's ways it can be done, diplomatically, but it's certainly having an effect. I mean, allies' defense spending is going up a lot. U.S. defense spending is going up a lot. So this is the geopolitical level. Let me just put a lock on that. And the second one is the Trump administration, a lot of bold initiatives across the board, a lot of really healthy things, I think, that help realign the Pentagon with where the world is heading, which is, in very different directions than even, 3 or 4 years ago. And so this is, at the geopolitical level, this is sort of an ongoing reordering of the international system. We don't know when it's going to stabilize. We don't know what the destination is, but we all feel this kind of transition phase that we're in from, the old structure, which was so familiar and clear and stable, to something different. We don't know what that something different is. We hope it's not World War III that kicks it off, but that's something that certainly animates my drive, my passion, my brain power to avoid that however we possibly can, while protecting U.S. interests. We can't avoid that by surrendering.
Yeah.
But China is a significant worry. And then you mentioned AI. And so amidst all this geopolitical dynamism, we have a historic technology now. Right now, it's not next year only. It's not in the future. Like, this is happening right now, where it is going to affect our economy. Already is affecting our economy, our society, how we relate to each other, and of course, the military. So those three sort of major elements of our daily lives, it's affecting things right now. We're adopting it in the military. We're seeing some of that in Operation Epic Fury. It's going up the value chain in the economy and will soon, I think, disrupt more and more white-collar jobs. That's why I wore the white collar. No. And certainly our society, it's impacting as well. And so this is very significant. And that's what I would call standard AI, let alone the possibility that many technical experts, which I am not one, say is the potential for a superintelligence, sometimes called artificial superintelligence, sometimes called artificial general intelligence. And this is where it gets to a level of capability that is beyond human, not just sort of on the level of a human, but beyond human, and becomes much more intelligent than we do. Some companies and others are trying to establish guardrails to prevent some of that from happening, or at least to channel it in ways that are consistent with our values and our security. It is unclear if that's going to happen. And I was in a room with one CEO in the tech sector, and the CEO said, no one yet has shown me that at the end of this set of developments, we're going to be safe. And I've also had AI technical experts tell me in private conversations, I would say, well, how bad could this get? And they would say things like, depending on the day, I think there's like a 3% chance of human extinction sometime in the next 3 years.
Wow.
Because the worry is, if it gets this smart, it starts to control things, maybe even physical things, and decides, if there are various scenarios, we could talk about movies where humans are not helping the situation. And so the values part of the AI, the lab development of AI capabilities, is really important for that reason.
Right.
Safety, trust, kinds of things, assurances. So that's on top of this geopolitical kind of maelstrom.
Yeah.
And then I would also add, for this discussion, the defense budget proposal for the next fiscal year for 2027 is 1.5 trillion with a T. Unprecedented. So we're talking about roughly a 50% increase in 1 year. Obviously, there's different forms of that. The 350 billion kind of in a separate category. We'll see what happens in terms of the Congress and the midterm elections in about 6 months, and how much of that will fly. But I think regardless, there's going to be a lot more. There likely will be a lot more resources available for the Department of War to do its thing, to acquire capabilities. And then we're also seeing in the Washington ecosystem, and I'm living this every day, a lot of new entrants, a lot of new companies. We have the neoprimes, Anduril, Palantir, and others, and then we have a whole host of others coming up, smaller, coming up behind them, many of whom I'm speaking with as well. So it's just, the one word I would use to characterize this time, it's just extraordinarily dynamic. Sort of my bottom line is that it's full of opportunity.
Yeah.
There is a lot of danger. There are a lot of risks, but throughout my career as a strategist, I've always tried to see opportunity even alongside or coming out of threats. And so that's kind of my overall thinking about this moment. And I do think it's an historic moment. And I'll end by saying, we don't know the destination. And so, future historians sometime in 2040 are going to look back and say, they're going to name the era. Before we had the Cold War, they're going to name this era. We don't know what that is yet, but that will happen.
From an industry perspective, let's go into some of those buckets you talked about. Let's talk about NATO. Let's talk about Europe. Let's talk about the burden sharing. And also this administration's seeming, I don't know if it's disdain, but there's certainly there's a tone of how it's being done. Do you think it's on purpose to get Europe to? I live in Europe, right? I'm over here. I'm part of this. Is it to get them to move out because at the end of the day, what is better for the U.S. is a strong Europe?
Yeah, I would say, and that's the way you put the question has really made me think harder about this. But I've been so obviously watching this for a very long time, at least since 2017. I think there's kind of two main strands here. One is the president's personal views and history, his own history, and what shaped him and his views as expressed even, in the 1970s and 80s and 90s, where I do think there is a bit of an animus toward some of our allies. And he also, I think, has been taken with the disproportionate levels of spending, which, and he's a business person. So that is something that really rings in his ears. So I think that has driven a lot of his public remarks and even some of the private discussions, I imagine, too, with key allied countries. It's not been across the board, obviously. I'll mention Japan, where it seems to have a very close relationship, no matter who the Japanese leader is, before Prime Minister Abe, now Prime Minister Takaichi. And I think that's been a smooth relationship. And there are others also. I would say the second, though, is more structural. And that kind of goes back to my discussion about the jungle growing back and how the allies have been warned for a very long time or asked for a very long time, please increase your defense spending, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that's the other strand of this. I would say, I'm someone who's worked closely with allied defense ministries, foreign ministers, national security advisors for a very long time. And I believe in my heart that the greatest asset, one of the greatest assets of the United States in terms of protecting our security and advancing our values is our global network of allies and partners, which no other country has. How was that network formed? Going back to Zbigniew Brzezinski's work a couple decades ago, it was formed by attraction. We didn't force these allies to become allies. They wanted to become allies because they saw that it was in their own national interests. And I think the ties that bind, even if the world changes, are they saw common values, how we organize our politics in terms of a democracy, how we organize our society, rule of law, free market economies. These are values that we all shared and that brought us together in addition to the national security interests. And so even as threats change, terrorism, Cold War, China, whatever they are, these are allies can stay together because they share these values. And so what I think is particularly dangerous about the current period, and I get texts and I get emails from Ella, is they're not so sure anymore. Like, what's going on in the U.S.? What are you guys going crazy?
The values thing, and
The values thing,
I hear it a
and
lot.
all what they see on on news, which is always negative. The shootings in Minnesota and whatever, what have you.
Yeah.
Key issues of the day, and then they're talking to China, and they go to China, and it's just this calm and high tech and very advanced and robots, and don't share our democratic values, but a stable, reliable, economic partner that isn't, throwing its military weight around in the world, from one country to another. And so I'm not saying that is not what I believe. I'm giving you the perception that I'm.
Do you think that NATO, as we know it, will survive? Do you think that the U.S. will stay in NATO? Or do you think, or I have a theory that U.S. will stay in NATO, but they're going to start charging the Europeans for services that they like space and intel. It becomes more of a business relationship.
Yeah, I think the U.S. will stay in NATO. President Trump uses public rhetoric to get better arrangements, to try to create leverage to get better arrangements. And I don't think that he would say that it's in America's interest, but not to speak for him, but the administration, it's not in America's interests to abandon and get out of NATO. It hasn't worked so well historically when the U.S. was not tied to Europe. We've seen that movie before in terms of World War. And so I think we are leading to sort of a rearrangement. And so one of the pillars of the national defense strategy that was put out in January of this year by the Pentagon was increasing allied burden sharing. It didn't say getting out of allies or alliances. It said strengthen their roles, give them the lead roles. And in terms of Europe in particular, yes, give them the conventional lead role. Have them step up in terms of capabilities. That's going to take a while, by the way. There's a lot of capabilities. But the U.S. would still wield its nuclear deterrent under various scenarios, although the Europeans are not entirely trusting that. And so they're developing some new approaches, even moving towards some new approaches, even for extended deterrence, extended nuclear deterrence. And so I think I agree with you. I think it's not an abandonment, but it's we're going to step back a little bit. We have other things to do. We've talked about our priorities. They are in the defense strategy. They are twofold: homeland defense, including hemispheric and Indo-Pacific. Those are our two clear priorities. Everything else is not a priority on that list. But I would note that at least over the last 20 years, every administration has said, we're not going to do Middle East stuff. We're going to do these other things. And then it's like Scarface. They get pulled back in.
We get pulled back in. And the only country mentioned specifically in NDS, I think, was Iran.
Right.
No, there's no Iraq. There was no Saudi. It was the only thing mentioned specifically. I think the country mentioned was Iran in the NDS.
Yeah. And so with that, the real world now.
Let's talk about the Middle East then.
Yeah, let's do it.
Because you read a great piece on the four scenarios, kind of the global scenarios coming out of Iran. All wars end. Well, not all wars, but most wars end, or at least
every war. There's a book, a famous book, Every War Must End.
All right. So four scenarios from a defense industry perspective. I mean, I know right now they're doing battle damage assessments on the facilities there, and there was already a movement underfoot, which General Siegel, the CENTCOM J4, was talking about on our podcast before, about pivoting to the West. This is before the Iran thing happened. Do we pull out of the Middle East? Do we downsize? Do we redistribute to the West? Do we push our partners to buy all of our stuff? And what's going to happen there post-war in the Middle East? High level.
My piece
with a defense industry view, probably more.
I see. Yeah. So my piece was more focused. Everybody's been focused on, rightly, sort of how does this war end and what does it mean for U.S., Israel, Iran, and the Gulf. My piece for the Atlantic Council, which can be accessed on their website, was what does it mean for the U.S.-China, for the big game, keeping our eyes on the prize? What does it mean for U.S.-China competition globally and medium to long term was sort of my focus. And we put out 4 scenarios where either the U.S. Put a lot more into it or stayed kind of limited, or China stayed kind of passive or got much more active. And those were the 2 variables that kind of defined our scenarios. But a major variable we found was the extent and the duration of the disruption of shipping, through the Strait of Hormuz. If that lasts a long time, it's much more damaging for the global economy. I think for the United States, it's not a minute-to-minute thing, but the longer that lasts, I think, Iran.
The Iranians know that, though, right? I mean,
the Iranians know that, and they're suffering, and we're suffering. But again, trying to stay focused on the U.S.-China, our thought was that if the disruption stays contained, then there's a modest erosion of our alliances like NATO in light of, hey, we went to war, but now you have to clean up the mess, was kind of the approach to the NATO allies. And they are starting to organize for helping with Hormuz. It's a finite energy shock, and it's incomplete sort of demonstrated U.S. resolve, and sort of China gains incrementally. But focusing more back on the Gulf itself, as you asked, I think underappreciated is this really interesting move by the UAE to get out of OPEC that came about, I think, was sort of in generation for a long time, but this kind of crystallized it, I think.
Chance.
Yeah. Their ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Al-Taiba, wrote a piece just talking about why they did it and what it means.
Do you see a more consolidated U.S. presence in the UAE in 3 years?
I think that's possible, and predictions are hard to get too specific, but I think we already have a good presence there. Al Dhafra,
sure. Dhafra's not,
and other access. We also have, by the way, AI presence, the G42 initiative that Microsoft and the U.S. government and the UAE worked out under certain conditions, and so that's also really interesting. And it was interesting that Iran went after a data center with a missile strike as well. So these kind of worlds are now intertwined for obvious reasons. So I think the ultimate answer to your question is, Iran is not going away. This is the largest country the United States has gone to war with since the Korean War in the 1950s. 93 million people. This is not Iraq. This is not Venezuela. This is not, Serbia. This is a very large country, former empire, with a culture and a theocratic dictatorial regime that has had, decades to entrench itself into the security to dominate the poor Iranian people, who are completely suppressed, and they killed tens of thousands of them within the last 9 months when they were just protesting. And so Iran's not going away, which means threats will continue. I do think the Gulf are already talking to contractors about a wide range of capabilities that they've learned lessons. And so missile and air and missile defense, number one, I think
counter UAS,
counter mine, port security, airport security. So looking at UUVs.
Yeah. And I was talking to one of the big infrastructure companies. Says they're doing a BDA, and they're also proposing how they could rebuild the U.S. military infrastructure where passive drone defense, like even underground bunkers and, certainly overhead covers and things like that. So certainly for industry, look, CENTCOM is reshuffling. It was reshuffling before this. And when the war stops, it'll just be interesting to see what the priorities are and what posture we want to keep there.
It sure will be, yeah. And I don't think, again, this was nowhere in the NDS really in terms of the top priorities, but I think there's going to be a stickiness it's not going to, let's say it's miraculously over.
Can't get out. We're stuck.
Not going to a status quo ante and everything's going to go to Homeland and Indo-Pacific. I don't think that's going to be the case because Iran's not going away.
So let's pivot out to the Pacific. We talked about Europe. We talked about the Middle East. And so let's talk about the Pacific. We know Secretary Kobe, when he came in, that was his top priority. Let's stop everything else and let's put all of our chips on the table out in Indo-PACOM. And yet the NDS and the NSS seem more conciliatory and less adversarial and more about, the way my read is more like, hey, we need to coexist and be partners and look for opportunities to partner. Do you see that? I mean, in this recent visit to China, there weren't any hard jabs thrown there?
No hard jabs. And I'm glad you raised this. It's worth going through. And so there's public documents and my understanding of how they ended up where they did. And actually this led to some delays in their release, the NSS and the NDS, was that the drafts coming out of, the initial drafts were tougher on China. And knowing that President Trump was going to meet President Xi, within a couple of months of when these documents came out, various parties were asked to, massage the language and package it in a way that was less stark, less hostile, kind of less frontal. And so that was done, I think, for both documents and for long-term strategy watchers and drafters like me. It was really surprising. These were surprising documents, like very different characterizations of
drastic change.
What many in the national security establishment, including in the government, think is our primary competitor and adversary, China.
But is it the real strategy, or is that just what we put out? And there is
what I'm saying is, I think, look, it's fantastic when one looks for opportunities to partner. As I've said on other media outlets over the last couple of weeks, much better to be talking than to not be talking. Even if you don't believe every word, but it's much better than not talking in a dangerous overall geopolitical circumstance. But let's be very clear. What is the driving potential threat for the Pentagon's development of new military capabilities, procurement of current capabilities, investments in science and technology and R&D for new technologies and adoption of new technologies? It's China.
Yep, that's right. That's right.
There are other threats, especially with uncrewed systems, but it's China. That's still the pacing threat for the department, and also if Undersecretary Colby, I think, had his way, for the posture and the current operational patterns of military forces. But the Middle East has pulled that and distracted those capabilities, I think, in a very significant way, obviously. So, but the overall budget, if you had to step back and you're talking to your family about, where's the Pentagon focus, I would say
it's the Navy.
70% of maybe 75% of the Pentagon's focused on a China.
Yeah.
Potential China threat. And it is a very, very demanding potential set of contingencies. I was just talking to some in a classified environment earlier this week about the types of scenarios that we should be preparing for regarding China. And it is a very, very demanding set of potential scenarios that could really change the world and impact Americans' economic security, military security, and other ways.
Before we go to AI, should we talk about Russia, or you just want to leave that?
No, I do think Russia continues to be a problem. They're not going away either. 11 time zones, I don't know if I would call them a great power, but they do have the most nuclear weapons of any, and so we have to pay attention to them. They have been a spoiler. They're looking to spoil as much as possible. Putin is clearly the younger brother now to Xi. It's all the pictures of them. Putin went to Beijing right after Trump left. And it's just a kind of a different relationship there. I think it's, Xi looking down to Putin in physically, but also in terms of the
Yeah.
country's
Yeah.
power. I do think they are closer. Never a complete amount of trust when you share that long a border and that much history. But they are closer and closer. And Moscow signed a defense treaty with North Korea. So they are now formal allies. So you cannot, in my view, one of the most dangerous trends is you have these four countries getting closer and closer. This is Iran, North Korea, Russia, and China. And, World War II started as two regional wars, and we now have two regional wars. And the adversaries are aligned, and the allies are pretty much aligned. And so it's something to watch very, very closely. Washington loves to organize regionally. And I'm constantly, in my discussions with Pentagon officials, like, you got to think about this as a global contingency. This isn't a regional war here. Or, this could be a global conflict, and you owe it to the American people to be prepared for a global conflict, not just China, Taiwan, or Russia invading NATO. A lot of my European friends are very worried about Russia reconstituting pretty quickly and going after some part of NATO to completely reduce its credibility, be that somewhere in the Baltics or up in the Arctic. Svalbard is this unique territory up there. So Russia's not going away. We would love for it to, but it's in terms of its military threat, that's not going to happen anytime soon. Russia's helping China and vice versa, and same with Iran and North Korea.
So I want to pivot into AI to close out, because we kind of started out talking about that, and then we hit the different geographies and adversaries. Does AI present a common, not enemy, but a common force that we need to align with China and our other adversaries in order to save civilization? Is this the UFO landing in our planet that we need to all line up and say, hey, we have to cooperate on AI. It's in our mutual interest.
Yeah, and I think there was some discussion of that from what I could tell from the Xi-Trump summit readout. And there are groups that are trying to, non-government groups, but also I think some discussions in the government. How do we think about guardrails on these models? There are two different approaches culturally, I guess, at this point. U.S., like large language models, two frontier labs, but others as well. Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, and others, Grok. China, much more diffuse, much more open source, much smaller, not only the large. So there was a DeepSeek kind of moment where this completely different approach led to cheaper and more and great capability. China seems to be winning in other parts of the world in terms of its models because it's less expensive, uses less energy. So I'm just adding that to the conversation because these are two different kinds of approaches right now. But there are common interests in trying to establish guardrails and not let this get out of control. So there are a lot of really thoughtful people looking at how do we develop these limits? How do we work together? How do we prevent the worst cases? But in the meantime, I think I see the developments kind of continuing apace. And the companies are trying to do their own guardrails and alignment with values, so it doesn't help terrorists and that kind of thing. If terrorists try, it'll say nope. But I worry that it's like there's just a headlong breakneck rush to develop the more and more and more capable AI with less thought on, okay, is this really where we want to go?
Right.
And if we get there, what's it going to look like? Will it be, as some have said, like we now have a new actor, in our civilization? There's just now a new entity that we will be working alongside forever. But this new entity, as Eric Schmidt and Henry Kissinger put in their book, which I strongly recommend, it's going to do things and we won't understand how it did it. And that's already happened. And they recount this in their book, where it developed a new antibiotic. And at least at the time of the writing, they said scientists are not entirely sure like how it figured this out.
Wow. Yeah.
And so it'll be the first time in human history where we don't understand some developments.
Right. But not the last, unfortunately.
But others do.
Yeah.
So it's just, and so even philosophically, like, what does this mean for the place of humans in the world? It's a pretty big deal.
Yeah. And to the audience out there, if you're everybody's having high level discussions about it, but I encourage you to reach out to Barry. He has some really good thought leadership around this, about the opportunities this is creating for new structures, national commissions, and all this has a direct impact on the defense industry. And I think everybody knows that, but I think a lot of boards are trying to figure out, how do we position ourselves to be on the right side of how this whole thing shakes out? And I think Barry's a great resource for that. We could talk forever about that. I want to put Barry on the spot, though, as we do all of our guests. Let's go ahead, fast forward 36 months. What could happen in 3 years, right? We're in 2029. And I want to hear Barry's view of, we've had a new budget come through. We've had hopefully the ending of the war in Iran and a reshaping of the Middle East. We have hopefully a stronger Europe, right? And a China that hopefully we've been able to manage to avoid having a direct conflict, which also seems like a big ask. And I'm an industry executive. I'm in 2029. I'm trying to figure out what the future looks like. Give us Barry's view of how all this foreign policy and AI comes together. What does the world look like in 2029? Big question.
You'll have to pay my subscription to get that. No,
okay.
No, just sort of off the top of my head. I mean, I think the one word that I continue to use to characterize it, and was the word I used in my Atlantic Council strategy paper, which I wrote in like 2014, 2015, called dynamic stability. It's dynamic. There's the negative side of it, turbulent, but there's also the opportunity side of it. And it's, this set of circumstances, this historic moment we're in, I think it's always both. There's sort of a darker and there's a lighter part of the circumstance that we find ourselves in. I don't think, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I don't think Xi Jinping's going to attack in 2027, the Davidson window. If I'm him, he thinks the U.S. is in inexorable decline. He thinks the summit just proved that further. And does he get, memos from his advisors that go counter to his views? I don't think so. Someone told me once there's two types of memos he gets. President Xi, you're the greatest leader that China has had in this century. And the other type is, President Xi, you're the greatest leader that China has ever had in our entire civilization. So I don't think, why would he take the U.S. on in the U.S.'s area of greatest strength, the military, expeditionary military capability, when he thinks we're heading downhill by the month? And he sees the images on media, and he meets with President Trump, and his hold on critical minerals caused us to buckle on tariffs in 2025 last year. I'm going to go out on a limb and say I don't think China is going to attack. I do worry about them continuing their coercive exercises and ringing Taiwan, and at one point maybe saying, okay, I'm completely surrounded Taiwan with military capabilities. Anybody that wants to get anything through here, you're going to have to come through us. But sorry, this is a permanent thing now. We're just reacquainting our brothers and sisters with the homeland.
Okay.
But that's my overall take on that. I do think AI is very significant. I think it will be much more efficient for businesses to continue to apply it both internally, but also to the types of capabilities that government contractors offer to the federal government. The federal government will increasingly try to adopt it. I'm guessing there are many watchers of this podcast who know much better than I that that's not an easy thing. and that the culture and the talent is not set up for rapid adoption, but it will continue. So kind of a steady uptake of AI capabilities and applications to a wide range of routine business and government operations. I also think increasing adoption on the pointy end of the spear in terms of the military. Clearly, it was used in the active combat phase of Operation Epic Fury, where so many more targets were serviced through the combination of Palantir and other companies' offerings. And so I think that will continue, and especially if you're talking about a Golden Dome, I mean, you need a very advanced AI capabilities for battle management, for C4ISR, and for targeting, et cetera. But this will be across the military establishment in terms of adoption, but also using it for maintenance and logistics. So the back end and the front end, I think, in terms of Pentagon. What does this mean for the private sector? I just think you're not going to need some jobs. I mean, I'm using it myself, and it's it's an amazing capability. And so I worry, a lot about the impact on employment, but I also think it will create new forms of employment, new industries, just the way the iPhone has created new industries, the way the automobile going way back. There's certainly a lot fewer horse and buggy drivers, but there's certainly a huge auto industry and ecosystem that's surrounding that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I think we're heading. I'm positive, I'm bullish. And I think the United States is still the preeminent economy and military in the world. And I think we're going to stay that way.
It'll be dynamic, no doubt. No doubt, Barry. Thanks so much for spending time with us today, Barry. You're just a wealth of knowledge, and really looking forward to see what you do next. Hopefully stay in touch. And we had to have you back on maybe in a year and refresh this thing and reflect on this discussion and use some AI to compare the future with the now, right?
You can have my AI avatar back on in a year.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Well, thanks a lot. Hopefully the audience, you got a lot out of this. Like I said, if you want to engage with Barry, I strongly recommend it, especially at the strategic level. I think he's one of the brightest minds, has a great track record. I say it every week because I believe it, that the future of GovCon is happening today, and guys like Barry are the ones that are helping to prove that. So thanks for coming on the podcast, Barry.
Thank you. It was really a pleasure, and I learned a lot from the conversation with you. I appreciate it.
Look forward to seeing you next time in DC.
Great.
All right, everybody. We'll see you next week. Thanks for joining.
Take care.
All right, so thanks for joining me on another episode of the Future of GovCon. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation and some of the bold predictions. If you did, take a second, share it on your social media, subscribe on YouTube. If you have any ideas for future guests or topics you'd like to have covered, hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm always there, and you can always learn more about precision talent solutions at pts.careers. Look forward to seeing you next week on our next episode.